In the fall of 1910, a young man by the name of Fred Schmeling came west from Ontario to Saskatchewan with a couple of friends, looking for farm work of any kind. The next year, the two friends headed back to Ontario, but Fred remained, saying, "Saskatchewan is good enough for me." His son Herb and his wife Olga describe the events that lead up to the building of the Schmeling Catalogue home 2.5 miles south of Bichard, and what life was like in the new home.
In Eganville, it was Renfrew County at that time, and the farm where he was raised is now the Chalk River power plant, Chalk River thing. Why he came east, because he couldn't get along with his dad. My dad's dad died in the flu epidemic, and then his mother married Mr. Branstead, and Dad and Mr. Branstead didn't see eye to eye at all. So he came out here. He was out here with Mr. Quast. He got on the Mr. Kerr met him at the hotel there in one morning. Went out to the farm, and I guess the two of them got along real good. And Mr. and Mrs. Kerr, they wanted to go down east for the winter, so they left Dad in charge of the whole place, horses and cows and everything for the winter. So he was chief boss there all winter. And he come back and he worked for Mr. Kerr again. And then he was going to go find a homestead. There were still homesteads available up at Hodgeville area. He went and looked those over, and there's nothing suited him. So he come back and he stayed. And Mr. Kerr got him, Dad wanted to start farming. So they bought this, where Dawn is now, they bought that quarter of both names, Mr. Kerr and my dad's name together. And well, until he accumulated enough money, and then he paid Mr. Kerr out. And he had title for it. When did he get it?
1917 he got the title.
1917, he had clear title. Well, they weren't living, that wasn't much of a house, from what I understand, it wasn't much of a house. And there wasn't much of a barn either. And Dad was just starting up, and he was going to build better things for his horses. So it just evolved from that. Mother figured, well, if you can build a barn for your horses, you can build a house for your wife. Or something like that. Well, where the pantry is now, that was supposed to be the entryway, according to what Mom and Dad told me years ago. It's supposed to go entryway, and you would go into your basement. You go upstairs into your kitchen, or to the left you turn off into your living room, dining room, or straight ahead go upstairs. But Mom didn't like that. She didn't want that. She wanted a little bigger kitchen. So that was closed up. And that was mainly the kitchen. In that pantry, she had all her fridge in there, and her sink, and all her cupboards for all her stuff, her sugar and flour and everything was in there. You go through the pantry, and you go into your dining room. And the summer was fine. The kitchen window faced east, and you didn't get the afternoon heat. And it was upstairs house. The heat always goes up into the upstairs. The bottom stuff was always nice, comfortable. Even with the kitchen stove going. Mom used that kitchen stove all the time. She was either baking bread or canning or doing something. But there was enough circulation. The house was always decent. But in the winter, it was a different story. In the winter, it was a different story. Well, that kitchen kept that house warm pretty well all winter. The Dad got up early in the morning. He stoked up the furnace. He got it going, got everything sizzling hot. Kept it going all day mostly. And for evening, he stoked it. But by morning, everything was cold. First thing got going was the kitchen range, and then the furnace. And Well, Mom and Dad had the room to the northeast, and I shared the room there in the northwest corner with the hired men. There was 2 beds in there. 4 of us slept in there. There's 2 hired men, and my brother and myself in the other bed. 4 in that room. And the school teacher had the room in the southwest corner. That was her room. And the other room was Irene's, my sister Irene, back in the southeast. And Elaine wasn't around yet then.
We got married, and
My dad was there most of the time.
yeah, Grandpa Schmeling was there from Mondays till Saturdays. He came out and farmed, and Herb's brother lived in the yard and lived in the house, and they had a hired girl. So I moved in with it.
Also a hired man.
Oh yes, a hired man too.
House full of people.
So we weren't alone until our daughter left to go to university. The coal and wood stove was there until '57 when the Sask Power came through. But we had the ironing came off of the 32 volt, and the washing machine worked off of the 32 volt. And we had kerosene fridge. And we took our meat products to chickens and beef and pork to Lang to the cold storage. And also any extra, we didn't freeze too much most of the garden produce was canned. We'd go in on Saturday into Lang to the cold storage, and we'd get our supply of meat that we thought we'd use during the week. And at the same time, we also canned chicken in half-gallon sealers. So we always had that handy.
Well, what would come in your mailbox would be the fall and winter or spring and summer catalog, and you'd see a come along there. In fact, some of the earlier ones were fairly significant entries in their own right, but mostly it would be a come along to order the plan book, and then from the plan book you made your selection. Then from that you bought the blueprint, and then from that, if you liked that, you ordered the house. Then it would all the lumber would be shipped from a mill in the lower Fraser Valley of British Columbia, as near as I've been able to determine. The mill work, doors and windows and banisters and things like that, came from Winnipeg. They actually did have mills in Winnipeg. But the carload of lumber came from British Columbia, and then you unloaded it and hauled it out the farm with team and wagon. In those days there were no semi-trucks, it was team and wagon, and there's many stories of trips 40 miles by team and wagon with this lumber. And then you had to have poured a basement and have it ready, and hired a contractor to build it. Now the Eatons were, you had the blueprints and the lumber, and a carpenter built it. The Aladdin were pre-cut, so people talk about them being like mechano sets all spread out over. Some people that can remember them being built can remember it spread out on the lawn like a mechano set and put it together. And Aladdin used to talk about how simple they were. You know, you didn't have to have any carpentry skills to put them together, but I suspect most of them were with some kind of carpenter's assistance. So and the thing was, it was a package that included the lumber, everything but the cement, the lumber, the paint, the doors and the windows and the banisters, and that's why they called them kit houses. You didn't have to run around to this contractor and that contractor. You had all the materials, were all there and all sent to you. So you had nails, everything was all part of the package. Prices ranged from a few $100s to a maximum of $2,000 in 1918, for example, when 1917, the last year that they had prices available. So the entry model, if you like, were simple 3 and 4 room single-story bungalows, and then it went to story and a half, and there were a lot of those where there were dormers in the second floor that gave you access to some bedrooms, always with sloping walls, but the story and a half was the next level, and they would run you in upwards to $1,000. A very common story and a half, although it's almost a two-story, was the Earlsfield, which had the double gambrel roof, and it was a very efficient design because of the gambrel or hip roof, or barn type roof, if you want to put it that way. So the story and a half was popular. In the Eatons literature towards the end of the period, they said the Eaton Court was their most popular design, but the one that has survived the most was the Earlsfield. Now, not all Earlsfields are Eatons either. UGG had the exact same plan, and there are other ones in other situations, but Earlsfield was the most common. So a story and a half. Then the two-story, mostly simple gable roof two-story houses were kind of the next level, and they'd run you into the 1,000 to 1,300 kind of range. Now these are prices for the lumber delivered to the site that you wanted. I mean, you had to do the erecting after that, and cement and anything was on top of that, but the basic lumber price. And then the 2.5 story, and they varied from 17 up to the Earl's Court that was $2,000. So that was kind of the range. You went from the simple bungalow up to the 2.5 story four square was sort of when you had arrived. They're the ones, if people had to draw a picture of it, that's what they would think. And for a number of years I thought that was Eaton's houses, because ours was a 4 square, and people told me, yeah, those were Eaton's houses. So every time I'd see a 4 square, I'd think that was an Eaton's house. And until, you know, I made the contact with Eaton's and got some plan book information and got some other information, I thought that was the Eaton's one. So, and it's the one that's in many people's minds, and it's a very common design of that time, because, you know, it had some stature to it. They're 2.5 story usually, and I kind of suspect that when you had your 4 square 2.5 story, you had arrived, and so that's why it's a special status. In the end, the origin of the Earlsfield, Eatons had their own architects, and now there were similar houses in Sears in the States with a similar double gambrel roof design, so they may have been borrowing from there. There's a lot of similarity back and forth between Sears and Eatons. In fact, I don't know what the connections were. I show in my book a 4 square with Eatons and Sears in the States that even used the same verbiage to sell the thing, so there was some borrowing back and forth. But Eatons had their own cadre of architects sitting right in the offices at Winnipeg making up house designs, so the Earlsfield would have come from there. United Grain Growers had one that was probably borrowed from Eatons, and I have seen the original blueprints, and I have it's near Melville. I have the house in the book, and the house has been moved, and there's 3 or 4 different people own it, but the current owners have the blueprints, and it says clearly United Grain Growers. So there was various variations on the theme, but I think the reason it was the most common is that it was so practical, and there was such a lot of house for that amount of money.